So, how do we answer those dreaded questions of walk me through your resume and tell me about yourself? Two of the most dreaded questions that every single person is asked in every single interview. And yet, it always seems like we're unprepared. So, here's a few things to think about. And I highly encourage you to make notes so that you have these prepared for your interview. Maybe set some 3x5 cards aside with some bullet points or something like that. So, a couple of things you want to do is always with your resume, start from the beginning and move forward. If you start with your experience now and go backwards, it's very confusing to the interviewer. It's really hard to backtrack. So you want to start from the beginning and move forward. Now, the caveat to that is if you've been in the workforce for quite a long time, if you've been in the workforce for more than 20 years, starting at the very beginning might be pretty lengthy. So you want to use your best judgment. And I would say always reference your experience from at least the past 10 to 15 years. If your experience goes much beyond that, if it's very relevant, then by all means include it. If it's not, then just start with your most relevant position in the last 15 years or so. What would make something relevant versus not relevant? As an example, if you're interviewing for an operations vice president at a global pizza delivery company, and one of your first jobs in high school and then in college was a pizza delivery person, that's really relevant experience because it lets that person know that you understand the life and what it takes to be on the front lines of their company. You know what it's like to pick up food and have to deliver it while it's still hot and collect money or get credit cards signed or what have you. So the lens you apply to everything you do will have that vision. And that's incredibly important. Oftentimes, senior leaders don't really understand what it's like to be on the front line of their organization. So, you bringing that experience, even though it may be 30 years ago, still gives you a little bit extra that someone else might not have. So, that's one relevant reason to talk about experience that's more than 10 to 15 years old. Now, if they ask you to start at the beginning, okay, but typically they're not super interested in the very beginning. They're interested in the most relevant experience. Now, if you changed careers, if you had big gaps in your resume, you want to address those. Perhaps you chose to be a stay at home parent for a period of time. You want to address that so that it doesn't leave them questioning why there's a gap in your resume. If you had an illness or you were caring for perhaps an elderly parent or an elderly relative, or maybe you went through some life altering situation, a divorce, a separation, what have you, it's okay to reference some of those things as long as you do it the right way. As an example, if there's a gap in employment and it's a result of an illness, you might phrase it like this. You might say, I was out of the workforce from 2009 to 2010 as a result of a very serious illness. Fortunately, I'm fully recovered. I've been working ever since and I've had no recurrence. So I'm very fortunate. But I did want to address that gap in my resume so that you understand what happened in my work history. That's short and sweet. You don't have to give them the details of your illness. You don't have to give them the details of anything. You simply address it. If you went through any kind of situation like that, you want to just address it at a high level, but don't give them too much information. It's really not appropriate. It's none of their business, but you do want to address it, especially if it's reflecting on your resume. Now, the tell me about yourself question is tricky because they don't really want to know all the ins and outs about you. What they want to know is about you as it relates to this position, this job, why you're interested, what you bring to them, and what makes you a great employee. That's what they're interested in. It's okay if you weave in some personal details, if you're a musician or an athlete or a big fan of a certain sport or something like that, and it makes sense in the conversation, or you use it as an icebreaker, that totally is okay. But don't go into great detail about your personal life, if you're single, if you're married, if you're gay, if you're straight, if you're from some particular place, if you, whatever it is, that is not detail they need in the interview when they're asking about, tell me about yourself. So keep it at a high level, keep it professional, use it as a way to weave in information you want them to hear about you. A key learning for anyone in an interview is to understand the best interviewers approach interviewing very much like it is a press interview. If you take the time to pay attention to celebrities when they're getting ready to launch a new book or a new movie or a new album, no matter what question they're asked, they always wrap it back around to whatever it is they're trying to pitch. If you watch a politician, and we're not going to get into politics, God forbid. However, I do want to talk about the way in which politicians respond to questions. There's a good and a bad side to it. The good side is politicians are highly trained to wrap an answer around whatever it is they want you to hear. And that is a skill as an interviewee you need to develop. No matter what they ask you, you need to make sure you can weave in and wrap it back to something you want them to hear about you. Now, you also want to address the question they're asking you. And oftentimes, politicians don't do that at all. They simply ignore the question they were asked and they go into whatever spiel they want you to hear. That's not a good tack when you're interviewing. You absolutely want to address the question they're asking you, but then think about ways you can weave in elements you want them to hear. I'll give you some examples. If I were asked a question like, tell me about a time you managed the accounting function within an organization. Well, I've never managed the accounting function within an organization, but what I have done might help me in that space. So the way I might respond to that would be, well, I've never managed the accounting function directly. However, I have had 20 years of leadership experience in human resources, talent acquisition, total rewards, learning and development, and multiple different areas under the human resources umbrella. And I have partnered, collaborated, and interacted with people from all over the organization. It is my understanding and belief that leadership is often very universal, as well as process design and critical thinking. And while I'm not an accounting expert, I do believe my experience in people leadership, process design, understanding how to use data to make decisions would serve me in a role where I was leading a team of accounting professionals. Because as a leader, the most critical element is to understand the challenges your team is facing and find ways to remove barriers so they can be successful. I don't necessarily have to sit and do their job. I have to understand the job, and I have to help them figure out better ways to execute the job they're doing. And I'm not sure it takes someone who's actually sat in the seat to do that. While it may help, I also believe that having executive leadership and a strong leadership presence and the experience I do have might even benefit the team more than someone who has sat in the seat, because I won't make assumptions about what they're doing. My questioning of why do they do this and why do they do that might actually expose some long-standing assumptions that wouldn't be exposed otherwise if someone has sat in the seat and just takes for granted what they're doing. That's a way to respond to a question where you didn't have the exact experience, but you brought forward experience you do have that could help you in that role. I share with you these examples because there will always be a time when you're asked a question you're unprepared for and you just don't have the answer to. And that's okay. Take a moment, gather your thoughts, and think about what you can share with them that would redirect their thought and show them, wow, okay, they may not have that, but I'm really impressed with what they do have and how they handled that. It also shows that you can think on your feet, and that's an incredibly important skill for anyone in any job. Hope this helps. I look forward to our next lesson.